I let my 30-year-old brother beat me up, and it was the best day of my life. My brother still lived at home at 30 years old, and everyone on the outside thought he was this amazing guy. But at home, different story. I was doing homework at the kitchen table when I heard my mom's muffled cry from upstairs. Then a crash. "Where's the money from your paycheck?" His voice boomed. I knew better than to go up there. Last time I tried to help, he twisted my arm so badly I literally couldn't write for a week. Then told everyone I was clumsy and fell off my bike. The thing about my brother Tick was that yes, he was abusive, but he was also smart. He always made sure the bruises were placed where nobody could see. Once, when I threatened to tell my teacher, he held my head underwater in the bathroom sink until black spots filled my vision. "Nobody will believe you," he said, smirking whenever I gasped for air. "I'm Coach Mike. I help kids." "And who are you?" "You're just a dramatic teenager on her period." He was right. When Mom called the cops after he punched a hole through her door, they showed up and just talked to him on the front porch. I watched from my window as he laughed with them. You know how moms get, officers? She's going through menopause. Very emotional. He rolled his eyes like she was a lot to handle. They left without even coming inside. The worst part was watching Mom shrink into herself. She used to sing while cooking. Now she'd flinch whenever she heard his car in the driveway. Started keeping her purse in my room because he'd take whatever cash she had. "For gas," he'd say. Then come home wasted and reeking of the devil's lettuce at 3 a.m. Everything changed when his girlfriend's parents invited us to their 25th anniversary party. My brother spent all week talking about how Mr. Montgomery was going to offer him a management position at one of his stores. I remember being there and staring at all the normal families laughing, eating tiny sandwiches, kids playing without fear. My brother was in full performance mode, charming everyone. His girlfriend's mom kept saying how lucky we were to have such a wonderful son and brother. That's when I saw him lock eyes with my mom across the patio. He made that subtle gesture with his fist, the same one he did at home before hitting her, a silent threat that meant behave or else. Mom immediately looked down, her hand moving to her bruised ribs, and she winced. Mrs. Montgomery noticed immediately. "Oh dear, are you all right?" "Just tired," Mom whispered. "Well, you must be so proud of Mike," Mrs. Montgomery continued, turning to me. "He is such a wonderful brother, isn't he?" Anger filled my heart. That's when I snapped. "Proud?" I laughed, but it sounded like broken glass. "Yeah, super proud," I said, smiling at Mrs. Montgomery. "Mike's been helping out so much at home lately." My brother's eyes flicked to me, a warning. But this time I ignored it. Mrs. Montgomery beamed. "That's wonderful. What a good son." I nodded. "He's been between jobs for a bit, so he has lots of time to help Mom." His smile tightened. Only I could see the muscle jumping in his jaw. "Between jobs?" Mrs. Montgomery looked confused. "But he said he was an esteemed teacher." "Oh right, the coaching thing," I said innocently. "That's volunteer work. But hey, experience is experience, right, Mike? Anything for the resume." His breathing changed. Shorter. I recognized it instantly and kept going. "At least he's 30 and figuring things out," I continued conversationally. "Some people know what they want younger, but everyone's different." 30? His girlfriend blinked. "You said you were 26. Did he?" I tilted my head. Time flies, I guess. That's when he snapped, crossed the patio in 3 strides, and backhanded me across the face. SLAP. I hit the ground hard, champagne glasses shattering around me. Blood filled my mouth. "You're dead. You hear me? Dead. Just like I promised last time." "Whoa, whoa!" His friend Gabe came back from the bathroom and pushed through the crowd of people ready to beat his ass to a pulp. His sister is always starting drama. I've seen her do this before. Gabe's voice died as soon as he saw me. He stared at my bloody face, the shattered glasses, my mom cowering behind a pillar. Then his eyes landed on the bruises climbing up my arm. "Oh my gosh," Gabe whispered, stepping backward. "Mike, what did you— those bruises are—" "Shut up!" my brother roared at him. "You're supposed to have my back!" Gabe kept backing away, his face pale. I didn't know. The next part happened fast. Mr. Montgomery grabbed my brother's arm. Tick shoved me backward and I fell into a table full of glasses. The crash was tremendous. Women screamed. Then my brother made the mistake of taking a swing at Mr. Montgomery. Within minutes, security had him pinned. Real cops showed up, not the friendly ones from our neighborhood. Mr. Montgomery was apparently golf buddies with the chief of police. He was arrested on the spot. But what I didn't anticipate was the jails being overcrowded, and him being let out on good behavior after just 3 weeks in a cell. Because for the entirety of his stay, there was just one thing on his mind: getting revenge on me. I woke up 3 days after his arrest knowing he was already out. My phone had blown up overnight with texts from people who'd seen him at the gas station, at the grocery store, just walking around like nothing happened. My whole body went cold. I stayed in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds downstairs. Mom was moving around the kitchen. I heard cabinet doors opening and closing, the coffee maker gurgling. Then her voice drifted up the stairs calling me for breakfast, and I could hear it. That shake, that tremor she got when she was trying to pretend everything was fine. I dragged myself out of bed and went downstairs. Mom had set out cereal boxes and toast like it was any other Tuesday morning. She smiled at me, but her hands were shaking as she poured coffee into her mug. Some of it slopped over the side onto the counter. She didn't even notice. I sat down at the table and watched her wipe the same spot 3 times with a dish towel. She was choosing this. Choosing to act like we could just go back to our normal routine. Like my brother hadn't threatened to kill me. Like he wasn't out there right now, free, thinking about revenge. I poured cereal into a bowl but couldn't eat it. Just pushed the pieces around with my spoon while Mom hummed this weird broken tune that kept stopping and starting. At the school, I sat through first period math without hearing a single word the teacher said. I kept looking out the window at the parking lot. Every car that drove by could be his. Every flash of movement made my stomach twist. By third period, I was checking my phone every 2 minutes, even though I knew he couldn't text me directly. During lunch, I tried to eat in the cafeteria with my friends, but their voices sounded far away, like I was underwater. Someone laughed really loud, and I jumped so hard I knocked my water bottle over. It rolled off the table and clattered on the floor. Everyone stared at me. I mumbled something about needing the bathroom and left. I made it halfway down the hallway before my vision started going blurry. My chest got tight. I couldn't breathe right. I slid down against the lockers and pulled my knees up to my chest. That's when Missy Lynn found me. She was the school counselor, though I'd never actually talked to her before. She crouched down next to me and didn't say anything at first. Just sat there while I tried to stop crying. Then she helped me up and walked me to her office. It was small and cluttered with books and had this ugly brown couch that was probably older than me. Allegra Lynn sat with me for over an hour. I told her everything. The years of Tick hurting me and Mom. The party where I finally exposed him. The arrest. The 3 weeks in jail that solved absolutely nothing. She didn't tell me I was overreacting or being dramatic. She didn't say boys will be boys, or that family stuff was complicated. She just listened and believed me. That validation made me cry even harder because someone finally understood how serious this was. When I was done talking, Allegra pulled out her phone. She scrolled through her contacts and then showed me a name. Francine Gray, a domestic violence advocate who helped people create safety plans. Allegra called her right there in the office and explained my situation. That same afternoon, my phone rang. I was walking to my car when I answered. The voice on the other end was calm and steady. She said her name was Francine, and then she said something that made my throat close up. You did nothing wrong by speaking up, and we're going to help you stay safe. I sat in my car in the school parking lot and cried again. But this time it felt different. Less scared and more like maybe I wasn't completely alone in this. 2 days later, I was sitting in a law office downtown. Jolene Pacheco had dark hair pulled back in a tight bun and wore a gray suit that looked expensive. Her office smelled like leather and old paper. She explained temporary restraining orders to me in a way that actually made sense. The criminal case against Tick was one thing, she said. That was the state charging him with assault. But I could file for a TRO right now, today, based on his threats and the history of violence. It was a separate thing. Civil protection. She pulled out forms and started filling them out while asking me questions. When did the abuse start? What kinds of things did he do? Who witnessed it? I answered everything, my voice getting steadier as we went. Between Allegra's session and this meeting with Jolene, Francine had called me twice more. She walked me through evidence gathering like it was a science. Screenshots of old threatening texts I'd never deleted. Photos of bruises I'd taken months ago and hidden in a locked folder on my phone. The names and contact info of people who'd witnessed the party assault. Mr. Montgomery, his wife, Gabe, other guests who'd seen everything. For the first time since this whole nightmare started, I wasn't just surviving, I was building a case. Actual documentation. Proof. Francine taught me to think like a lawyer. Save everything. Write down dates and times. Keep a log of every incident, even small ones. The courthouse was busy when Jolene and I went to file the TRO paperwork. We waited in line at the clerk's window for almost 20 minutes. When we finally got to the front, the clerk was this older guy with reading glasses hanging on a chain around his neck. He looked at my forms and then looked at me. He made this comment, almost under his breath, about how Coach Mike does so much for the community. Like he was annoyed I was even filing this. My face got hot. Anger bubbled up in my chest, but before I could say anything, Jolene squeezed my shoulder. She leaned forward and said very clearly that evidence speaks louder than reputation. The clerk's face went red and he processed the paperwork without another word. The hearing was scheduled for the next afternoon. A different judge, not the ones who usually handled Tick's volunteer stuff at the youth center. This judge was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes. She read through everything, looked at the photos, watched the video Gabe had sent, asked me direct questions about the threats. I answered each one, keeping my voice steady even though my hands were shaking under the table. The judge granted me a temporary restraining order. 2 weeks until the full hearing. No contact. Stay 500 feet away. Violation could mean arrest. I felt my shoulders drop with relief. Then Jolene turned to my mom, who'd come to the hearing but sat in the back row. Jolene suggested Mom should file for a protective order too. Mom's face went white. She shook her head. Started saying she didn't think it was necessary, that it might make him angrier, that a piece of paper couldn't really protect us anyway. I watched her shrink back into that scared version of herself and felt my stomach twist. We left the courthouse and Mom drove us home in silence. I felt relieved about the TRO. Finally, something official that said Tick had to stay away from me. But I also felt guilty. Mom refused protection and I couldn't force her to take it. It felt like I was abandoning her, even though I was the one he'd specifically threatened to kill. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling again. Around midnight, I heard it. Mom crying in her room. Not loud, but I could hear the muffled sounds through the wall. I didn't know how to help someone who wouldn't help themselves. I pulled my blanket up to my chin and listened to her cry until I finally fell asleep. The next morning, I woke up to 37 notifications on my phone. My stomach dropped before I even opened them. Someone had created an anonymous account called Truth About Liars and posted a long thread about me. The post mentioned specific things only Tick would know, like the time I supposedly stole money from Mom's purse in 8th grade, which never happened, but he'd told that lie to cover when he took it himself. The account called me an attention seeker who invented stories for sympathy. It said I had a history of lying and making up drama. Each post was careful, never threatening me directly, just planting seeds of doubt about my character. I took screenshots of everything with shaking hands. 37 posts, all time-stamped from between midnight and 3 in the morning. I saved each one to a folder on my phone, then sent the entire batch to Jolene before I even got out of bed. She called me back within an hour. Her voice was calm and professional as she explained that this was good for our case, actually. Every post was evidence of continued harassment. She told me to think like a lawyer from now on. Document everything. Stay factual. Let his behavior speak for itself instead of getting emotional in my responses. Don't engage, don't defend, just preserve the evidence. I wrote down her instructions in my notebook and felt slightly less powerless. At least I was doing something concrete. I went downstairs to find Mom already at the kitchen table with her laptop. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept at all. I showed her the social media posts and watched her face crumble. She wanted to respond, to defend me publicly, but I repeated what Jolene had said. Document, don't engage. Mom nodded, but I could see how much it hurt her to stay silent while someone attacked her daughter online. After school that day, I walked up to our front door and stopped cold. A bouquet of wilted flowers sat on the doormat, brown petals scattered across the concrete. A small white card was tucked into the dead stems. My hands went numb as I picked it up and read the 2 words written in block letters. Remember the treehouse? I was 12 when Tick held my head underwater in that treehouse. He'd been mad about something I couldn't even remember now, and he'd dragged me up there and shoved my face into the bucket we used to collect rainwater. I remembered the panic, the burning in my lungs, the black spots filling my vision. I remembered thinking I was going to die. Mom came outside and saw me standing frozen with the bouquet. She reached for it, saying we should just throw it away, but I stopped her. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone, but I took photos from every angle. The wilted flowers, the card, the placement on our doorstep. Evidence. That's what this was now. Evidence of his psychological warfare. I called the non-emergency police line and filed a report. The dispatcher said someone would come by to document it. 3 hours later, a detective named Ross Hensley showed up at our door. He was maybe 40, with gray at his temples and tired eyes that had seen too much. He took photos of the bouquet, bagged it as evidence, and sat down at our kitchen table to take my statement. Ross had handled domestic violence cases before. I could tell by the way he listened, really listened, without any skepticism in his expression. He said Tick was testing boundaries to see what he could get away with. The social media posts, the bouquet, all of it was part of a pattern. He was letting me know he could reach me whenever he wanted. Ross explained that without direct contact or explicit threats, he couldn't arrest Tick yet. My frustration must have shown on my face because he held up a hand and said he understood how slow this felt. But every incident I reported created a documented pattern. Solid cases took time to build. He told me to keep doing exactly what I was doing. Screenshot everything, photograph everything, report everything. He was building what he called a pattern file, and eventually the accumulation of evidence would be enough to take action. That evening, Mom asked me to come to her room. She had her laptop open with spreadsheets covering the screen, rows and columns of numbers, bills, and expenses going back months. She explained why she couldn't just leave. The house was in her name, which sounded good until you realized she could barely afford it on her salary alone. Tick used to contribute just enough each month to make her dependent on him. Not enough to have real ownership, but enough that without it, she'd lose the house. She showed me the mortgage payment, the utilities, the insurance. The numbers made my chest tight. We were trapped not just by fear, but by money. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Bennett Otero, our neighbor 2 houses down. He said he'd seen an unfamiliar car idling on our street around midnight. Dark sedan, tinted windows. He didn't get the plate number because he'd been heading to bed when he noticed it, but the description matched Tick's friend's car, the friend who'd tried to defend him at the party before he saw my bloody face. I realized Tick was using other people to watch us. He couldn't violate the restraining order himself, so he was sending others to do his surveillance. I forwarded Bennett's text to Ross, and then drove to the police station to file another report. Ross added Bennett's statement to the pattern file, but warned me that each individual incident might seem minor on its own. It was the accumulation that proved harassment. I left feeling frustrated by how slow everything moved, but I understood the strategy now. We were building a case brick by brick. At the school on Monday, I met with the principal to create a safety plan. We mapped out altered routes between classes that kept me away from exterior doors and secluded hallways. A security officer would escort me to my car in the parking lot at the end of each day. We established a code word I could use if I felt threatened, something that would immediately bring help without alerting anyone else to what was happening. The principal took it seriously, which made me feel slightly less vulnerable during the 7 hours I spent on campus each day. Structure helped. Having a plan helped. On Wednesday, a formal-looking letter arrived in our mailbox. Thick paper, law firm letterhead, my name typed across the front. My stomach dropped as I opened it. The letter claimed that Tick's lawyer would sue me for defamation if I kept spreading lies about him. It listed potential damages in the tens of thousands of dollars. It used phrases like malicious intent and reputational harm. I read it 3 times, my hands shaking worse with each pass. Then I called Jolene. She listened to me read the entire letter out loud, and when I finished, she actually laughed. Not a mean laugh, but one of recognition. She said it was a classic intimidation tactic with no legal merit whatsoever. Everything I'd said about Tick was documented truth. I had photos, videos, witness statements, police reports. Truth was an absolute defense against defamation. The letter was designed to scare me into silence, nothing more. Jolene told me to file it with our other evidence as proof of his continued attempts to control and intimidate me. I hung up feeling shakier but also angry. He was still trying to manipulate me, still trying to make me afraid to speak the truth. 2 days later, I walked out of 6th period and froze in the middle of the hallway. Through the glass doors, I could see Tick's beat-up sedan sitting in the parking lot, 3 rows from where I'd parked my car that morning. He wasn't looking at me or even moving, just sitting there behind the wheel with his hands visible on the steering wheel. My backpack slipped off my shoulder and hit the floor. The security officer noticed me staring and followed my gaze, then immediately radioed something I couldn't hear. I grabbed my bag and took the long route to my car, the one that kept me near the building's side entrance where cameras pointed at every angle. My hands shook so badly I dropped my keys twice before getting the door unlocked. I drove straight home and called Ross from my driveway. He showed up 40 minutes later with a notepad, and that serious expression he always wore when adding something to the pattern file. Ross drove to the school and pulled security footage that showed Tick's car arriving at 2:47 p.m. and leaving at 3:15 p.m., exactly the window when students flooded the parking lot. The next morning, Ross called to tell me he'd confronted Tick about the school appearance. Tick had smiled and explained he was visiting the athletic director about volunteer coaching opportunities for the spring season. He had an appointment confirmation email and everything. The athletic director verified the meeting happened, said Tick seemed like a great guy who really cared about helping kids. Ross added the incident to the file, but his voice sounded tired when he told me to keep documenting every single time I saw Tick anywhere. I wanted to scream into the phone because this was exactly how Tick operated. He always had a reason, always had an excuse that sounded completely reasonable to anyone who didn't know him. The coincidence story would hold up in court because technically he did have legitimate business at the school, but I knew the truth. He wanted me to see him there, wanted me to know he could reach me whenever he felt like it, wanted me to understand that a piece of paper saying he had to stay away meant absolutely nothing. I logged the sighting in my documentation app with the exact time, location, and Ross's follow-up notes. That same afternoon, Francine met with Mom at a coffee shop across town, somewhere Tick would never think to look. Mom came home 2 hours later with paperwork from a different bank, one clear across the county where Tick had no accounts or connections. Francine had helped her open a checking account in only Mom's name and set up direct deposit for a small portion of each paycheck. Mom kept touching the temporary debit card in her purse like she couldn't believe it was real. She was scared to death that Tick would somehow find out, kept asking me if I thought he could track new accounts, or if banks shared information. I didn't know the answers, but I repeated what Francine had told her, that financial independence was the first real step toward eventually being able to leave. Mom nodded, but her hands were shaking when she hid the bank paperwork in my closet behind my winter clothes. Over the next week, I noticed small changes in Mom that felt like watching someone wake up from a really long sleep. She seemed more present during dinner, actually listening when I talked about school instead of just staring at her plate. She started keeping her purse in my room every night instead of leaving it downstairs where Tick used to go through it. I watched her check that the front and back doors were locked before bed, something she'd never done before because Tick always handled the locks. These were tiny steps, barely noticeable to anyone else, but to me they felt like progress. Like maybe Francine was getting through to her in ways I never could. One morning, Mom's car wouldn't start when she tried to leave for work. The engine turned over but made this weird clicking sound, and then nothing. Mom called a mobile mechanic who showed up an hour later and popped the hood. I was getting ready for school when Mom knocked on my door, her face completely white. I followed her outside, and the mechanic pointed under the car at something small and black attached to the undercarriage with a magnet. A GPS tracker, the kind you could buy online for like $50. My hands went completely numb as the reality hit me. Tick had been following our exact movements for who knows how long. Every trip to the school, every visit to Jolene's office, every meeting with Francine. He knew everywhere we went and when we went there. The mechanic carefully removed the tracker and put it in a plastic bag. Mom called Ross immediately and he arrived within 20 minutes. He documented the serial number and took photos from every angle, then sealed the tracker in an evidence bag. Ross explained this was a major escalation because it showed premeditation and stalking behavior, not just random harassment. He said this tracker, combined with everything else in the pattern file, significantly strengthened our case. I felt sick knowing Tick had been tracking us like animals, knowing our every move before we even made them. That evening, I got a message request on social media from Gabe, Tick's former friend who'd tried to defend him at the party before he saw my bloody face. The message was long, and I had to read it 3 times to believe what he was saying. Gabe wrote that he had video footage from the anniversary party that clearly showed the assault. He'd been recording because he thought Mr. Montgomery might make a toast, and he wanted to capture it. Instead, his phone had been recording when Tick crossed the patio and hit me. Gabe said watching that video over and over made him realize their whole friendship was based on him enabling abuse and looking the other way. He said he wanted to help make it right and attached the video file to the message. I downloaded it with shaking hands and pressed play. The footage was crystal clear, better quality than I expected. You could see Tick's hand making contact with my face, hear his screamed threat about how I was dead, watch Mom cowering behind a pillar with her arms wrapped around herself. The video caught everything, every detail that proved exactly what happened. I forwarded it to Jolene immediately and she called me back within an hour. She was already drafting a motion to extend my temporary restraining order with this new evidence attached. The video eliminated any question about what happened at that party, made it impossible for Tick to claim I'd exaggerated or made anything up. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. The message just said, "You can't hide from me, Acorn." My stomach dropped. Acorn was the nickname Tick gave me when I was 6 because I used to collect acorns in the backyard. Only family knew that name. Only Tick called me that. I recognized his phrasing immediately, the way he always made threats sound almost friendly. The violation of him using that private childhood nickname made me feel sick in a way I couldn't explain. I forwarded the text to Ross and Jolene, then blocked the number. But the next morning, another text came from a different number with a similar message. Then another one that afternoon. By the end of the second day, I'd received texts from 3 different spoofed numbers, each one carefully worded to sound casual while carrying that unmistakable threat underneath. The messages never said anything directly violent or illegal, just things like, "Hope you're doing okay, Acorn," and "Thinking about you, little sis." But I knew exactly what he meant. He was telling me he could reach me whenever he wanted, that blocking numbers meant nothing, that I couldn't escape him no matter what I did. Francine called Mom the next morning and suggested she start writing down every incident in a notebook. Mom resisted at first because putting it on paper felt too real, but Francine explained that seeing the pattern in her own handwriting might help her understand what was actually happening. So Mom bought a plain spiral notebook and started logging everything. Every time Tick's car drove past our street, every blocked number that called and hung up, every time she felt watched at the grocery store or saw someone who looked like him in a parking lot. I watched her fill 3 pages in just 2 days, her pen pressing hard into the paper like she was angry at it. When she finished writing on the 3rd night, she sat at the kitchen table staring at those pages for almost an hour. Her face changed while she read her own words, like she was finally seeing something she'd been avoiding for years. The pattern was right there in black and white, undeniable and documented. She closed the notebook and looked at me with tears running down her face, but for the first time since Tick got released, she didn't look scared. She looked mad. 3 days later, I was sitting in chemistry class trying to focus on balancing equations when someone dropped their textbook. The bang echoed through the room and suddenly I wasn't in the school anymore. I was back at the party with champagne glasses shattering around me and blood filling my mouth. My chest got tight and I couldn't breathe right. The edges of my vision went fuzzy and dark. My hands started shaking so bad I knocked my own textbook off the desk, and that second crash made it worse. I tried to stand up, but my legs wouldn't work properly. The teacher was talking to me, but I couldn't hear her words over the rushing sound in my ears. Someone guided me to the hallway, and I ended up sitting on the floor with my head between my knees. The school nurse appeared and checked my pulse, then called Allegra from the counselor's office. Allegra sat down on the floor next to me and didn't try to make me talk. She just stayed there while I focused on breathing in for 4 counts and out for 6 like she'd taught me. It took almost 20 minutes before the panic faded enough that I could speak without my voice shaking. Allegra explained that what just happened was a normal trauma response, not me being weak or broken. She said my brain was trying to protect me by remembering the danger, even when there wasn't any danger in that moment. Hearing her say it was normal helped somehow, like I wasn't failing at handling this situation. Over the next week, Allegra met with all my teachers to set up something called a 504 accommodation plan. The paperwork gave me official permission to leave class if I got triggered, plus extended deadlines on assignments and the option to take tests in a quiet room instead of the classroom. Having the school actually acknowledge that I was dealing with a real crisis made me feel less alone. It wasn't just me making excuses or being dramatic like Tick always said. The accommodations were proof that what I was going through mattered and deserved support. I still felt guilty about needing special treatment, but Allegra reminded me that managing trauma while going to the school was like trying to run a race with a broken leg. The accommodations weren't giving me an advantage, they were just leveling the playing field, so I could actually function. The next incident happened on a Saturday when Mom asked me to grab her purse from the car. I brought it inside and noticed it was heavier than usual. When I looked inside to see why, I found a small plastic bag with white pills that neither of us recognized. Mom's face went pale when I showed her. We'd both been so careful about keeping her purse locked in my room at night, so how did these get in there? Then on Monday, Mom ran into one of Tick's former coworkers at the post office. The woman made a comment about hoping Mom was getting help for her problem, and when Mom asked what she meant, the woman said Tick had mentioned Mom was struggling with substance issues. The pieces clicked together immediately. Tick had planted those pills in Mom's purse somehow, probably during one of his drive-bys when we were both at the school and work. Then he'd started spreading rumors to make people think Mom had a drug problem, trying to destroy her credibility before she could build a case against him. The calculated cruelty of it made Mom's hands shake, but this time she wasn't shaking from fear. She was shaking from anger. She took photos of the pills and the bag, then we drove straight to the police station to report it. That same week, Bennett texted me at almost midnight. His doorbell camera had caught someone walking past our house at 11:47 p.m., and when he checked the footage, it was clearly Tick. Bennett sent me the video file, and I forwarded it to Ross immediately. In the footage, Tick walked slowly past our house, looking directly at the windows like he was checking to see if we were home. There was no legitimate reason for him to be in our neighborhood that late, especially not walking instead of driving. Ross added the footage to our evidence file and called me the next morning. He said Tick's pattern was showing increasing boldness. The late-night visit meant Tick felt comfortable enough to physically come to our street, not just drive past or send threatening messages. Ross was building a case, but he needed more evidence to convince the district attorney to file charges. 2 days later, Ross submitted what he called a probable cause packet to the DA's office. The packet included everything we'd documented since Tick's release. The spoofed text messages using my childhood nickname, the GPS tracker found on Mom's car, the planted pills and rumors spreading, Bennett's doorbell camera footage, the defaced childhood photo, every single incident laid out in chronological order to show the escalating pattern. Ross explained that the DA was being cautious because each individual incident seemed minor when you looked at it alone. A text message, a late-night walk, some pills that could have gotten in the purse any number of ways. But Ross argued that the cumulative pattern showed clear criminal behavior. Stalking and harassment weren't just about one big scary event. They were about a systematic campaign to terrorize someone. The DA said she'd review the packet and get back to Ross within 2 weeks. Then Jolene called with news that made my stomach drop. The court hearing to extend my temporary restraining order had been pushed back 2 weeks due to scheduling backlog. My TRO was about to expire, and now I'd have to wait another 14 days for the extension hearing. Jolene's voice was frustrated when she explained this was normal for the court system. Cases got delayed all the time because there were too many hearings and not enough judges. She knew it was scary to have that gap in protection, but there wasn't anything we could do except wait and keep documenting everything. I wanted to scream at how slow everything moved when my safety was at risk, but instead I just said okay and hung up. I spent those 2 weeks strengthening our evidence file because it was the only thing I could actually control. I created detailed timelines with dates and times for every incident. I cross-referenced the text messages with the doorbell camera footage and the GPS tracker discovery to show how Tick's behavior escalated. I organized everything into categories: direct threats, stalking behavior, property damage, witness statements. The methodical work gave me something concrete to focus on, instead of just sitting around feeling scared. Jolene reviewed my documentation and said it was better than what most lawyers put together. The day of the restraining order extension hearing finally arrived, and I put on the nicest clothes I owned. Mom drove me to the courthouse, and we met Jolene in the hallway outside the courtroom. Then Tick walked in wearing a full suit with his hair neatly trimmed and his face clean-shaven. He looked like he was going to a job interview, not a hearing about his abusive behavior. He smiled politely at the clerk and held the door open for an elderly woman. Every gesture was calculated to make him look like a respectful, upstanding citizen. Watching him perform for the judge made my skin crawl because I knew exactly how fake it all was. This was the same person who held my head underwater and threatened to kill me. But right now he looked like someone's helpful neighbor or friendly coach. The bailiff called us into the courtroom and the judge reviewed the paperwork. Jolene stood up and gave an opening statement about the years of documented abuse and the escalating harassment since Tick's release. Then it was my turn to testify. I walked to the witness stand with my legs shaking and put my hand on the Bible to swear to tell the truth. The judge asked me to describe what had been happening, and I started with the party assault. My voice shook when I talked about the backhand across my face and the champagne glasses shattering, but I kept going. I described the years before that when Tick would twist my arm until I couldn't write or hold my head underwater in the bathroom sink. I explained how he always made sure the bruises were hidden and how he'd convinced everyone I was just a dramatic teenager. Then I moved to everything since his release. The anonymous social media posts, the spoofed text messages using my childhood nickname, the GPS tracker on Mom's car, the planted pills and rumors, the late-night surveillance, every incident documented with dates and times and evidence. When I finished talking, Jolene played Gabe's video from the party on a laptop. The courtroom got completely quiet as everyone watched Tick cross the patio and hit me. You could hear his threat clearly on the recording. See Mom cowering behind the pillar, watch me fall into the table of glasses. I looked at the judge's face while the video played and saw her expression shift from skeptical to concerned. She leaned forward slightly, watching the screen more carefully. When the video ended, she asked Jolene several questions about the timeline and the documented incidents since Tick's release. The judge looked at Tick sitting there in his perfect suit and then back at the video on the laptop screen. She asked him if he wanted to respond to the evidence, and he started talking about how I was a troubled teenager who needed attention. But she cut him off after about 30 seconds. She said the video evidence was clear, and the documented pattern of harassment since his release showed continuing threat. She granted me a full protective order for 1 year with strict no-contact provisions. Tick had to stay at least 500 feet away from me, my school, and our home. He couldn't contact me directly, or through other people. He couldn't post about me on social media. If he violated any part of the order, he could be arrested immediately. I felt my whole body relax for the first time in weeks. The judge turned to Mom and asked if she wanted to file for a protective order too, since the evidence showed years of abuse against her. Mom looked at Tick and then down at her hands. She shook her head and said she didn't think that was needed. The judge asked her 3 more times, explaining that the order would give her legal protection, but Mom kept refusing. I wanted to scream at her to say yes, to protect herself, but I just sat there watching her choose fear over safety. We left the courthouse and Jolene told me the protective order was a good start, but I needed to keep documenting everything. Mom drove us home in silence and I felt relieved about my own protection, but scared that she was still vulnerable. 2 days later, I walked out to the school parking lot after 6th period and found my front passenger tire completely flat. I got closer and saw the long slash mark across the rubber. Someone had cut it on purpose. I looked around the parking lot, but there were no cameras covering this section, and all the other students were already gone. My hands started shaking as I pulled out my phone and took pictures from multiple angles. The timing was obvious. Tick got served with the protective order yesterday, and now my tire was destroyed. I called Ross and he came to the school within 20 minutes. He examined the tire and took his own photos, then helped me document everything for another police report. He looked frustrated when he told me there was no direct evidence linking this to Tick. No witnesses, no footage, nothing concrete. But he added it to the pattern file and said the escalation from psychological harassment to property damage showed Tick was losing control. He was getting bolder and more reckless, which meant he might make a mistake that would give us the evidence we needed for an arrest. I got my tire replaced and drove home, checking my mirrors constantly. At the school the next week, I realized my grades were dropping fast. I was so exhausted from constantly watching for Tick that I couldn't focus on homework or tests. I'd stare at a math problem for 10 minutes without understanding any of it. During English class, I fell asleep at my desk and the teacher had to wake me up. Even with the 504 accommodations giving me extended time and the option to leave class, I was still failing. I went to see Allegra during lunch and she could see how tired I looked. She contacted all my core teachers and arranged deadline extensions for my major assignments. She also connected me with a tutor who could help me catch up on the material I'd missed. The tutor was a college student who came to the school library twice a week. Having that extra support helped, but I still felt like I was barely keeping my head above water. Between sessions with Allegra, I met with Francine at her office downtown. She taught me a detailed system for documenting everything related to Tick. She showed me how to keep daily logs with exact times and descriptions of every incident. She helped me set up a cloud-backed evidence folder where I could store photos, screenshots, and recordings that wouldn't get lost if something happened to my phone. She gave me a safety contact list with her number, Ross's number, Jolene's number, and the domestic violence hotline. The structure of it all made me feel more in control. Instead of just being scared and helpless, I had specific steps to follow. Every time something happened, I knew exactly what to do. Document it, photograph it, log it with date and time, upload it to the cloud, notify my support team. The protocol turned my fear into action. Then Jolene called to say Ross had requested increased patrols past our house. Ross wanted police cars to drive by multiple times per shift to check for suspicious activity. But when I talked to Ross directly, he was honest about the limitations. He said with their limited resources and shift changes, they couldn't provide constant surveillance. The patrols would help, but there would be gaps. Officers might drive by 3 or 4 times per shift, but that still left hours when no one was watching. I appreciated his honesty even though the reality was scary. At least he wasn't pretending we had more protection than we actually did. He suggested I keep documenting everything and call 911 immediately if I saw anything suspicious, even if it seemed minor. On Wednesday after school, Mom and I went to the grocery store to pick up food for dinner. We were in the cereal aisle when I looked up and saw Tick standing near the end cap, holding a box of crackers. He wasn't supposed to be within 500 feet of me, but here he was, less than 20 feet away. Our eyes met and he smiled. Not a friendly smile. The kind of smile that said he knew exactly what he was doing. I grabbed Mom's arm and pulled her toward the front of the store, abandoning our half-full cart in the middle of the aisle. Mom asked what was wrong, but I just kept walking until we got to the car. My whole body was shaking as I pulled out my phone and logged every detail. The exact time, the store location, what aisle we were in, what he was wearing, the way he smiled. Mom said maybe it was just a coincidence, but I knew better. Tick didn't shop at this store. He was there because he knew we'd be there. Only 2 days after the grocery store incident, Jolene filed another motion with the court. She listed everything that had happened since the protective order was granted. The slashed tire, the grocery store encounter, plus the earlier stuff like the texts and the GPS tracker and the property damage. She argued that Tick was systematically violating the protective order's spirit, even when he technically avoided direct contact. The tire slashing had no proof, but the timing was suspicious. The grocery store encounter was technically legal since it was a public place, but combined with everything else, it showed a pattern. Jolene requested a hearing to address the cumulative violations and ask for stricter enforcement. The court scheduled it for 3 weeks out because their docket was completely overloaded. 3 more weeks of living in fear while we waited for the legal system to catch up. But Ross reminded me that every single day of documentation made our case stronger. Each incident I logged, each photo I took, each detailed report I filed added another piece of evidence to the pattern. Jolene said the same thing when I called her frustrated about the delays. The legal system moved slowly, but that didn't mean it wasn't working. I tried to focus on what I could control. I kept logging incidents in my daily journal with exact times. I maintained my safety protocols like checking my car before getting in and varying my routes home. I got through each day by breaking it into smaller pieces. Just get through this class. Just get through lunch. Just get through the drive home. Small goals that felt manageable when the big picture was too overwhelming. I needed my own money and my own escape plan, so I applied for a part-time job at the bookstore near our house. They hired me to work weekend shifts, Saturday and Sunday afternoons. Mom agreed to drive me there and pick me up since I didn't want to be alone in the parking lot. The bookstore was quiet and calm, the opposite of everything else in my life. I shelved books and helped customers find what they needed, and for those few hours each weekend, I could almost pretend I was a normal teenager with a normal job. The paychecks weren't huge, but I opened my own bank account and started building an escape fund. Having my own money felt like a small piece of independence in a situation where I'd had so little control. Every dollar I saved was one step closer to being able to protect myself. One evening, I came home from my bookstore shift and heard something I hadn't heard in months. Mom was humming, just this quiet little tune while she stood at the stove stirring pasta sauce. I froze in the doorway because the sound was so strange after all the silence. She looked up and smiled at me, this small, fragile smile that didn't quite reach her eyes but was real. I felt something crack open in my chest, this tiny piece of hope that maybe we were actually going to be okay. Maybe all the documentation and safety plans and legal paperwork were actually working. I helped her set the table and we ate dinner together without jumping at every sound from outside. It was the most normal 20 minutes we'd had since Tick got out of jail. The next afternoon, I checked our mailbox and found an envelope with no stamp or return address. Inside was a photo from when I was 7, the one where I'm missing my 2 front teeth and holding a soccer trophy. Someone had taken a pen and scratched out my face, so hard the paper was torn through. My hand started shaking as I stared at it. The message was clear. He could reach me. He could get to our mailbox. He knew where we lived, which was obvious, but seeing the defaced photo made it feel so much more real. I wanted to crumble the picture and throw it away because looking at my destroyed childhood face made me want to cry. But I didn't. I pulled out my phone and photographed it from 3 different angles, making sure the scratches were visible. Then I added it to my evidence folder and filed another police report. That's what I did now. Every violation got documented. My phone buzzed with a text from Bennett asking if I'd seen anything weird lately. I told him about the photo, and within an hour, he'd created a group text with 5 houses on our street. Mrs. Chen from next door, the Robinsons across the street, the college students who rented the blue house, and an older couple at the corner. Bennett explained what was happening without sharing details I didn't want public. He just said my family was dealing with a safety issue, and asked if people could report suspicious activity. Everyone agreed immediately. Mrs. Chen said she'd been wondering why police cars kept driving by. The college students offered to keep their porch light on all night. Knowing I had actual neighbors watching made me feel less alone. It wasn't just me and Mom and Francine and Ross anymore. We had community eyes. Allegra called me during lunch period with news about the therapy appointment. She'd been working the waitlist for weeks and finally got me a slot. The therapist could only see me every other week because she was completely booked, but even limited sessions were better than nothing. My first appointment was on a Thursday afternoon. The therapist was younger than I expected, and she didn't make me sit on a couch or anything weird like that. We just talked in chairs across from each other. She explained that my constant checking of locks and windows and my trouble sleeping and my jumping at sudden noises weren't personality flaws. They were survival responses. My brain had learned that danger was real, and it was trying to keep me safe by staying alert. Hearing that made me cry because I'd been thinking something was wrong with me for reacting this way. 2 days later, Mom came into my room with her phone and tears streaming down her face. Tick had sent her an email, a long one, full of apologies mixed with blame. He said he was sorry she felt hurt, but she needed to understand his perspective. He'd been under a lot of stress and she wasn't being supportive enough. He missed her and wanted to fix their relationship. The email made my skin crawl because I could see exactly what he was doing, apologizing without actually taking responsibility, making it sound like her feelings were the problem, not his actions. Mom sat on my bed and asked if she should respond. She wanted to explain to him why his behavior was wrong. I took her phone and read the whole email again, highlighting the manipulative parts. Then I told her we should forward it to Francine instead of responding. Mom hesitated. I watched her stare at the email like she was actually considering writing back to him. My heart started pounding because if she responded, she'd be opening a door we'd worked so hard to close. I reminded her about everything Francine had taught us. No contact meant no contact. Any response, even an angry one, told him his tactics were working. Mom's hand moved toward the reply button, and I physically reached out and stopped her. I asked her to trust me and forward it to Francine first. She finally agreed. Francine called within an hour and spent 30 minutes on the phone with Mom, walking her through every manipulation tactic embedded in the apology. By the end of the call, Mom agreed to maintain no contact. She deleted the email without responding. Ross showed up at our house 3 days later with another officer. He said they were arresting Tick for cumulative violations of the protective order. All the documented incidents, the texts, the stalking, the GPS tracker, the defaced photo, everything together showed a clear pattern of harassment. I felt this huge wave of relief wash over me. Finally, someone was taking this seriously. Finally, there would be consequences. Then Ross explained that the bail hearing was in 2 hours, and based on Tick's lack of prior violent convictions, the bail would probably be set low. My relief died instantly. I asked how low, and Ross said probably low enough that Tick could post it and be out by evening. 2 hours of safety. That's all we got. Francine came over that same evening after Tick made bail. She brought printouts about short-term shelter placement programs, safe houses where Mom and I could stay while we figured out longer-term solutions. Mom looked at the papers like Francine was asking her to move to another planet. She explained that she'd lived in this house for 20 years. All her memories were here. She couldn't just leave. I understood her attachment, but I was also terrified. Tick had just been arrested and released in the same day. What was going to stop him from coming here? Francine didn't push. She just left the information on our kitchen table and told Mom to think about it. After she left, Mom went to her room and I heard her crying. I couldn't sleep that night, so I got up and started preparing. I pulled out my old soccer duffel bag and filled it with clothes, my important documents, cash from my bookstore paychecks, phone chargers, and copies of all our evidence files. I hid the bag in the back of my closet behind my winter coats where Mom wouldn't accidentally find it and freak out. Then I downloaded a safety app that Francine had recommended. It let me share my location constantly with multiple people. I added Allegra, Francine, and Bennett. If something happened, they'd know exactly where I was. I set up the app to send automatic alerts if I didn't check in every 12 hours. It felt extreme, but after watching Tick get arrested and released in the same day, extreme felt necessary. The break-in attempt happened on a Saturday morning. I was at work shelving books in the mystery section when my phone started buzzing with calls from Mom. My hands went cold as I answered. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. Someone had tried to break in through the back door. She'd been in the kitchen making coffee when she heard splintering wood. The door frame cracked and the handle started turning. Mom screamed and ran toward the front of the house. That's when Bennett started yelling from his yard. He'd been outside watering his plants and heard the noise. His shouting scared whoever it was away. By the time Mom called 911, the person was gone. I told my manager there was a family emergency and drove home going 15 over the speed limit the whole way. When I got there, Mom was sitting on the front porch with a police officer, wrapped in a blanket even though it wasn't cold. Shaking so badly, the officer had to hold her coffee cup steady. The CSI van pulled up 20 minutes later, and 2 technicians in navy jackets started photographing the splintered door frame from every angle. I stood in the kitchen doorway watching them dust black powder across the damaged wood, hoping they'd find something that would finally put Tick away for good. One technician shook his head and called his partner over to look at the smudged marks. They took samples anyway, but I could tell from their body language it wasn't good news. Ross showed up while they were packing their equipment and pulled me aside to explain that the prints were too smudged to be useful in court. He added the incident report to what he called the pattern file, noting how Tick had moved from harassment to actually trying to force his way into our house. The lack of hard evidence made my stomach hurt, but Ross promised this escalation mattered even without fingerprints. Jolene called my cell phone before the CSI van even left our driveway. She'd already heard about the break-in through Ross and was filing an emergency motion for GPS monitoring right now, that very afternoon. The hearing got scheduled for the next morning because the judge took attempted home invasion seriously. I sat in the courtroom at 9 a.m. watching Jolene present our documentation, the pattern file, Bennett's statement, everything we'd been building for weeks. The judge granted ankle monitoring and a 7 p.m. curfew for Tick, which Jolene said was a win, but I felt sick knowing he'd already proven he didn't care about violating restrictions. That afternoon, Francine showed up at our house with information about shelter-safe rooms where Mom and I could stay, while a locksmith installed new deadbolts and a security company set up cameras. Mom resisted at first, clutching her coffee mug and saying she couldn't just leave her home. Francine sat with her for an hour explaining that it was only for a few days, just until the house was secure. We packed bags that evening and drove to a plain brick building with no signs outside. Inside, the shelter coordinator showed us to 2 small rooms with twin beds and explained the rules about keeping our location private. That night, I heard Mom talking to another woman in the common area, both of them sharing stories about partners and family members who'd hurt them. Through the doorway, I watched something change in Mom's face as she realized other people understood exactly what we'd been living through. The next morning, Mom agreed to start keeping her purse locked in the shelter safe, to share our schedules only with Francine and Ross, and to follow all the safety protocols she'd been pushing back against for weeks. It felt like the first real step toward her actually protecting herself instead of just hoping Tick would stop. And that's where we'll end today. I'm really glad you were here. It always makes these stories feel more special when they're shared. Hopefully it left you feeling a little lighter or more hopeful. Subscribe if you'd like to keep the positivity flowing.